A massive multi-trillion-dollar bank has just been exposed for buying $217 million worth of MicroStrategy. But this huge entity is not the only massive entity quietly buying MicroStrategy today. Let's not forget, we've got the central banks of Switzerland, Norway, and even the multi-trillion-dollar Korean pension fund quietly buying MicroStrategy to get exposure to Bitcoin. Now, does all of this quiet accumulation of MicroStrategy have to do with the massive warning that Michael Saylor just sent directly at the Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds? Well, I think it does. And today, Opti, myself, and the greatest crew here on Bitcoin, we're going to be breaking down Michael Saylor's warning towards the Middle East and why these sovereign wealth funds and governments are using MicroStrategy to buy Bitcoin. Let's play that clip of Michael Saylor's very stern words and warnings that he pointed towards the Middle East.
It's loading. My bad, guys. Let me get this going.
The suspense.
Fund.
The path to legitimacy.
So tell me, if you're a sovereign wealth fund, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, how would you be diversifying that portfolio? How much Bitcoin would you own?
All of it. Look, to tell you the truth, I think it's kind of an IQ test. It's like if you had $1 billion and you wanted to double it, you would buy the $1 billion of Bitcoin and put out a press release. But if you wanted to make $1 trillion, you would try to buy as much as my company has right now. You go buy $50 billion worth of Bitcoin and just keep buying, and it'll be $1 trillion to you. So you ought to buy as much as you want money, right?
Yeah.
I think that my forecast for Bitcoin is it goes up 29% a year compounded for 21 years, which is going to be 3-4 times better than the next best thing. So yeah, I could tell you, yeah, put 5% of your portfolio in it, but smarter would be to put 150% of your portfolio in it. If you want 10x your money, you buy Bitcoin. If you want 100x your money, you buy Bitcoin with somebody else's money. And if you want 1,000x your money, you use somebody else's money, buy Bitcoin, and you lever it, right? The simplest thing going is borrow money at 3, 4, 5%, invest it at 30 to 60%, keep the difference. My company went from a $600 million enterprise value to $108 billion enterprise value in 4.5 years, and we just did that formula. We're just levering it. So I think as much as you can get is the right answer.
I think the only problem with this warning by Michael Saylor, Opti, is the fact that not every sovereign wealth fund can get as much Bitcoin as they can get. Because again, today we've only got 2.5 million coins sitting on exchanges. We got Michael Saylor openly announcing he wants to raise another $84 billion of capital to buy more Bitcoin. Quick maths at the time of recording, Bitcoin's at about $100,000 a coin. $84 billion worth of demand would represent what? Another 800 odd thousand coins going to MicroStrategy. And what I think is really interesting, I want your thoughts on this, Opti. Michael Saylor pointed out the Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds. We know that the Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds are all sitting on around $500 billion. The Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, they've got about $500 billion. The Qatar sovereign wealth fund, that has about $450 billion worth of money in it. So I'd be really interested, guys, what do you think about why we're seeing all of this demand for MicroStrategy by these central banks around the world? Is this kind of their way to quietly get Bitcoin exposure while not actually openly and publicly adopting Bitcoin as a treasury reserve asset like is happening in America?
Yeah, dude, Luke, I would fully say that this is the case going on right now. We got to remember we are still a little, actually, let me introduce our guests before. We have DJ Valerie here. I'm sure you guys are familiar with her, and Bob McDonell. And they just came, well, DJ Valerie just came back from El Salvador, and we got some really cool story coming out of El Salvador. So thank you guys for showing up. And then on the question, Luke, yeah, from my perspective, I would say that what we're seeing right now is essentially a lot of people probably still feel I don't know, concerned about Bitcoin being a legitimate asset. We are seeing a lot of new trends come out here. You know, we're seeing some of the biggest banks start to embrace Bitcoin. For better or worse, that's kind of where we are right now. We're seeing nation state FOMO embrace Bitcoin. We're seeing sovereign wealth funds embrace Bitcoin. And I think it's two factors. One, I think Bitcoin still kind of has this stench on it that it's not a legitimate asset yet. You know, people don't realize that it's growing up, it's not mature. And then two, they probably have a lot of wealth in the traditional financial system, and it's still pretty difficult to get that wealth into Bitcoin. So the next best thing is either the ETFs or, you know, Michael Saylor's MicroStrategy. And when you kind of look at what Saylor's doing with the strategy Bitcoin playbook, as he said himself, it's a leverage play on that Bitcoin. So it's obviously seemingly going to get more outside returns than just holding a spot Bitcoin ETF. We've all been seeing what's going on with strategy. For some reason, you know, everyone's scratching their head like, what's going on here? Bitcoin goes up, what, 50%, and Saylor stock goes up X more percent than that. And everyone's wondering, like, what is going on? As Saylor said himself, this is a leverage play on Bitcoin, and he's just locking in on trying to get as much cheap debt as possible to buy as much Bitcoin as possible. And I think people are waking up to this. So those would be my kind of takes on this. But I don't know, Luke, am I confirming my own bias here?
I don't know. I think it's really interesting that he singles out the Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds, and he specifically mentions $500 billion worth of Bitcoin. I think there's a little bit of maybe the signal in what he's saying there. Maybe he's aware of the fact that these Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds are some of the biggest in the world. I mean, I think at the end of the day, though, we're all kind of confirming our biases here. We're all very, very bullish and optimistic on the future that Bitcoin is going to bring. And I think the fact that now Michael Saylor is directly talking to the biggest sovereign wealth funds in the world in the Middle East and urging them and telling them, look, you need to buy as much Bitcoin as you can. I think we're beginning to see some signs develop that maybe there's a bit of a scramble going on for Bitcoin behind closed doors. We've been screaming about the Bitcoin on exchanges decreasing over the past 5 years. Again, about 1 million coins have left the exchanges since 2020. That's about 30 to 35% of all the Bitcoin that was on exchanges in 2020. And at the same time, the OTC supply of Bitcoin has also decreased by about 80% since 2022. This is the over-the-counter exchanges. A lot of people speculate, a lot of people with, a lot more intelligence than myself say that this is how the big boys are accumulating. They're buying Bitcoin over the counter, secret, closed door kind of buys, so to say. Because again, some people say this impacts the price less. I don't have the technical chops to be able to verify whether that's true or not, but I do think it's interesting that 80% of the supply on OTC desks has gone over the past 2.5 years, and 30 to 35% of the supply on exchanges has decreased. Again, there is a lot of public buys of Bitcoin going on with Michael Saylor. America has announced their intentions to buy, but who is responsible for the 1 million plus coins that have left the exchanges over the past 2 to 3 to 4 years? Is it other sovereign nations quietly accumulating? Again, it's just a question, but I do find it interesting that some of the largest sovereign wealth funds around the world are being exposed for buying MicroStrategy. So again, if they're publicly buying or publicly mining Bitcoin, they can keep that a secret. But buying MicroStrategy as a central bank or a sovereign wealth fund, every quarter you actually have to update your quarterly filings with the SEC. This is how we're finding out that not just the central banks of Switzerland, Norway, and even pension funds in Korea, but also massive banks like Goldman Sachs and Deutsche Bank, the $1 trillion giant we're talking about today, these entities are buying MicroStrategy. So again, I think this is some pretty big signal that the big boys, the big banks, the big institutions, the big pension funds, the central banks, they're all buying Bitcoin. I think it's really interesting to see this develop alongside the supply suffocation that we are seeing with Bitcoin just consistently leaving the exchanges.
Yeah, totally. And actually, I want to add one little wrinkle before we pass it on to our guests, because I don't know if you guys saw yesterday, but Trump did a huge conference with, the Prince of Saudi Arabia. And some of the big news that came out yesterday was that he's, the Prince or Saudi Arabia, they're going to invest $1 trillion into the American economy. Now, wondering and speculating where that money is going to go, I think that it's a pretty easy bet to say that some of that stuff is going to go into Bitcoin. We've been seeing them talk about, Bitcoin. We know Trump's really pro Bitcoin, or you could argue pro crypto, but $1 trillion coming from the Middle East into the US. There's a new trade alliance. I would venture that there's a lot more capital that's going to flow into Bitcoin than we can even imagine right now. It does feel like the floodgates are being opened up. And of course, we're just seeing some rumors and speculations and some grumblings of what might happen. But I think it's very safe to say that the really high net worth individuals in the Middle East are also looking at Bitcoin as what we know it to be, an apolitical, neutral money. In the face of all the trade war stuff we've seen in the last couple of weeks, I think it's very, very safe to say that they're looking at Bitcoin very seriously. Now we have the biggest banks in the world, some of the richest people in the world, sovereign wealth funds, institutions, nation states. They all have to take Bitcoin seriously. And I would venture that some of this, trade agreement that we saw come out from this Trump press conference in Saudi Arabia, it's going to go into Bitcoin. We'll get the details later, but I'm pretty convinced that this is going to happen. Anyways, without letting our guests sit around too much, I will introduce DJ Valerie. Valerie, what's your thoughts on this and how are you doing today?
Oh my God. Thanks, Opti. Thanks, Luke. And thanks, Simply Bitcoin, for having us on the show. Hopefully my thoughts are, as much as I want to see everybody adopt Bitcoin, I also want them, to start using it as a medium of exchange, because that's what we're going to need. And, I was just in El Salvador. Bob's going to be coming up in a second, who's the founder of the House of Life. It is so important that we continue to remember why Bitcoin was created. It's a peer-to-peer decentralized money exchange system, right? Where everybody can opt in and have an opportunity to get out of financial slavery and poverty. And, I think I'm so grateful because obviously when number goes up, people can start using it as a medium of exchange. But what's blocking medium of exchange right now in many of the countries, certainly in the United States, is capital gains taxes that are on Bitcoin. And so, I think we've got stages of adoption as we keep moving forward. So God bless Michael Saylor for, all the work he's doing. I'm grateful that, our president right now is out there, shucking and jiving and trying to stop the wars and get Bitcoin, not crypto. Okay. I'm not a crypto person, of course. But I'm really grateful to see what's going on right now. And, I feel like we're at this, just beginning of the tidal wave, of what's going to be happening for an adoption, what's going to be happening for how are people escaping authoritarian regimes, how are people building their new lives, how are people, building for their future, so this is what we're going to talk about with Bob and I a little bit, what's happening down in El Salvador with orphans and kids who've been human trafficked, abused, abandoned. How are they saving in Bitcoin? How are we helping Bitcoin cross borders so that nonprofits, like there's orphanages in Uganda and all over the place. And so how is Bitcoin creating not only number go up, but peace go up, love go up, and freedom go up? Those are so important. And I think Bitcoin is a network of love. And I think each one of us are nodes on this network of love. And I'm grateful that we've got these, high-powered people who are waking up the TradFi folks into why Bitcoin is something that's so important to have it separated from state. So we want to have money separated from state in every state, because we never know who's going to be in office, who's going to be in power, and how are people going to be shutting down our bank accounts, blocking us from having the opportunity to buy milk for our children, like what happened during the trucker protests. And so Bitcoin is a tool for freedom. It's a tool for peace. It's a tool for love. And I'm so glad that we've got all of these. I always look at the whole world as remember the light brights when you were a kid and you would put all these different colors in the light and you'd make a picture. Each one of us are these little cool light brights, right? And so that's what the network is. These are nodes. We are all individual nodes connected through our hearts and allowing technology to connect us. And Satoshi, God bless you, Satoshi, for bringing us together. And I always think about Satoshi, do you even understand, or did you even anticipate that you would be connecting all these hearts, minds, and spirits and people's missions and creating this massive tidal wave of change with this beautiful creation, invention, revelation, right? And so the human aspect of what Bitcoin is doing around the world, obviously, I wouldn't get to know Luke and Opti and Bob if it weren't for Satoshi and if it weren't for this grand creation. And so, we used to think as money as, the the love of money is the root of evil. It's not. Everybody has to have money. Everybody uses energy so that we can have a medium of exchange to share our goods and services with each other. And Bitcoin is the only sound money that's ever been created. And so nothing is second. And so there is only Bitcoin that can help create a peaceful, prosperous, and fair and free world for all people. So I'm super excited. I'm super excited to see all these bigwigs out there and really starting to get it, and I think, instead of people, because a lot of people are like, oh my God, self-custody, what does that mean? There's stages of entering the Bitcoin journey, so if that means you're buying MicroStrategy and you're like, yeah, I'm exposed, great. Let's start figuring out how you can start actually getting Bitcoin, hodling it. How are you self-custodying it? So I think what's super important, what we've done down in El Salvador just in the last week, Miss El Salvador, Alejandra raised over $15,000 just with a few social media posts in Bitcoin to help the House of Life. We've got, 10 babies and 8 girls who are, between the ages of 12 and 17 who have been pregnant, abused, raped, and human trafficked. And so Bitcoin is creating an opportunity for these beautiful women to, grow into thriving members of society. I'm a consultant and a business person. I know you guys just know me as DJ Val, but I've run 2 different multi-million-dollar hedge funds and real estate stuff. Worked at Deloitte and Touche, so I have a lot of finance background. But it's more fun that you know me as DJ Val and the podcaster. But what's really cool is analyzing what's going down on, with the House of Life and how are we helping people escape domestic violence, human trafficking, et cetera. 4 stages. Okay. This is how I kind of broke it down. 1 is awareness and, helping people escape, getting them rescued, right? That's what Brian Matta is doing with his documentaries, Operation Amber Alert, et cetera. And we've got tons of people. There's over 350,000 missing kids at our border just alone. There are millions of children who are being trafficked, abused, raped, and tortured all over the world. If we as Bitcoiners are not standing up and using our time, treasure, and talent to help these children, what the hell are we doing? What are we doing? Okay. And so this is what's so cool. So stage 1, we need to rescue. Stage 2, rehabilitate them. That's what Bob's doing down at the House of Life and micasakids.org. So he's been rescuing these kids for the last 30 years. Now he's rescuing the pregnant kids. And so stage 3, how are we going to train them in, the future of their life so that they can be, self-sovereign with their money? We have to teach them about Bitcoin. How are they going to use AI? How are they going to use marketing? How are they going to be salespeople? How are they product developers? How are they going to be able to make a living without having to go into the sex trafficking trade or go and only have the skill set of making pupusas on the side of the road while their babies are at home? So that's stage 3. Stage 4 is where the heck are these girls going to live? Where are the people going to live? The number one thing, Julie and I from Bold Bitcoin, we did this vision board workshop with the kids. All of these girls, their number one dream was to have a home of their own, because the homes that they came from are violent and scary. And now the home that they have, which is a family that Bob's created, and we'll bring Bob up on the stage just a minute, are like, home is so important for a woman. I'm a mom. As soon as you get pregnant, something happens with all your hormones. All of a sudden you're like, oh man, I got to put some feathers in the nest and I got to make a place for my baby. I want to be safe. Right. And so when kids, when these beautiful girls feel safe, they don't want to give their kids up for adoption. They don't want to commit suicide. And then, so once they kind of graduate out of Bob's, stage 2, where do they go? So we've got places like Murph's Life. We've got places like Club Cocal. We've got places like Bitcoin Mansion and Julian and Will. All of these folks are developing Bitcoin communities in El Salvador, and we want to create an open source playbook for how are we helping these folks out of violence, human trafficking, being raped, etc., and then not being defined by their past, but allowing themselves to dream for the future. And so Bitcoiners, literally in the last month and a half, my whole life has changed because of this project and God. And the last week, 10 days, we have gotten dozens of new Bitcoiners on board who are volunteering their time, treasure, and talent. And so we got a house donated at a fundraiser that we did last week. So I'd love to bring Bob up and talk about that, if that's okay, guys, and talk about the fundraiser, Bob. So this is Bob McDonell. He's been, helping children have a safe place. Bob is someone who I think is an angel that walks on earth. When he walks into the House of Life, when he's into the Mikasa Kids for the boys and the girls who aren't, pregnant, he kisses each one of them on the forehead. And he says, hello, daughter. Hello, son. and he kisses their babies. These children now feel like they have a father figure and they feel safe. And Bob he's an angel. So
yeah, thank you so much
welcome,
for coming on, Bob. Let's do could you just do a quick 1 or 2 minute pitch of what House of Life is, and then in the back end of the show we will cover all the details and we'll go back into what DJ Valerie was saying. So welcome to the show, Bob.
Thank you so much, Valerie. Thank you guys so much for having us. The House of Life basically is saving babies before they're damaged, before they're thrown into gutters by desperate mothers with no support, no place to go, before they take their lives, before they take the lives of their babies. They win the lottery. They come into a place where they're supported. They're coming into a place where they're safe. We use a lot of different psychological tests. When the girls come in, they're cutting themselves, they're suicidal. Within just a few days, you can see it in their faces. They relax. Within a month, the levels of depression are down by 50%. And it's pretty incredible, but within 2 months, a lot of the girls are at zero as far as depression levels go. They start dreaming about their babies instead of wanting to throw their babies into a gutter or give their babies up for adoption. Once they feel safe and protected, it's like God's programmed mama bear instinct takes over. And these are girls that have been raped. These are girls that the babies are from their own fathers or grandfathers or cousins through incest. They all of a sudden want to be mamas, and they start thinking, how am I going to care for myself and my baby? That's the big question. And that's where the Bitcoiners have it's exploded down here with Bitcoin. It's the best thing that's ever happened to El Salvador is the Bitcoin revolution down here.
Absolutely incredible. Well, I'm super excited to talk about that later on in the culture. But before we go on, guys, you already know the deal. Smash the like button, hit the subscribe, and of course, comment on this show. And we got a lot to talk about. We got the Dave Ramsey Show flipped on Bitcoin. We have some interesting news coming out of the SEC and self-custody. And of course, we're going to be talking about House of Life later on in the show. But before we move on, we want to give a big shout out to our boys over at the Bitcoin Well. Go to bitcoinwell.com/simplybtc and sign up to get Bitcoin on Bitcoin Well. It is literally self-custody by default, which means you never have the opportunity of getting rug pulled. You put in a Bitcoin address right when your fiat goes through, right when your dollars go through, they send you the Bitcoin. They have never a chance of actually rug pulling your Bitcoin because they never hold the Bitcoin. Okay, on that note, guys, let's get into the show because we got a jam-packed program for you today.
I want to tell you guys about our sponsor, Stamp Seed. Is your Bitcoin in cold storage really secure? Are your seed words really secure? Stamp Seed's do-it-yourself kit has everything you'll need to hammer your seed words into commercial-grade titanium plates instead of writing them down on paper. Don't do that. Paper sucks. You want to literally stamp your seed into this plate of titanium. Your words are actually stamped into the metal plate with this hammer. So once your words are in, they aren't going anywhere. No risk of the plate breaking apart and your pieces falling everywhere. Titanium stamp seeds will survive nearly triple the heat produced by a house fire. They are also crush-proof, waterproof, non-corrosive, and most importantly, because this is generational wealth, time-proof. All things that paper is not, allowing you to hodl your Bitcoin for the long haul. I mean, here is the plate that they crushed. They put in water, they put a blowtorch to it, and as you can see, the words have survived. Stamp your seed on Stamp Seed. And you can use promo code SIMPLY to get 15% off anything on their store. Head over to stampseed.com today.
All right, boys and girls, you already know the deal. Scan the QR code. Anyways, we're over here on Clark Moody's dashboard going over the numbers, and the current Bitcoin price is $103,240 per Bitcoin. The sats per dollar, aka how much Bitcoin you can buy for a single dollar, aka how much the dollar is worth in Bitcoin, is currently at 969 sats. We are under 1,000 sats. I repeat, we're under 1,000 sats per dollar, boys and girls. And the current block height is 896,699, and the market cap in dollars is $2.05 trillion. And the Bitcoin versus gold market cap currently at 9.12%. Still a long way to run in the hard money game. We are going after, I think gold's at $22 trillion market cap. We are going to conquer that $22 trillion market cap soon. And the total percentage of Bitcoin that will ever be issued is currently at 94.59%, roughly 19.86 million Bitcoin in circulation. And the realized monetary inflation is currently at 0.84%. And I don't know if you guys saw, but the dollar inflation numbers came in yesterday, and I think it was 2.3. Even though it's lower than expectations, it's not anywhere close to Bitcoin. And of course, the decline from all-time high is negative 5.6%, and everyone's freaking out. We're only down 5%, and everyone's still, angry at each other, attacking each other. It's like, we're only down 5%, guys. All-time high soon. Let's go. All right, guys. So as I was telling you, and it's actually kind of ironic because I'm pretty sure we were kind of trolling Dave Ramsey yesterday in the chat. I might have brought it up on the show, and then this clip came out later in the day. So apparently the Dave Ramsey Show has flipped on Bitcoin. It's not Dave Ramsey himself, but their programming is flipping on Bitcoin. So I'm going to start with, let's go with Dave Ramsey originally. I believe this was 2014 when Bitcoin was around $500. And let's hear what he said, and let's hear the updated takes from the Dave Ramsey Show. So first is Dave Ramsey himself.
Go ahead and, I got all you Iraqi dinar people and all you gold people all pissed off at me. So let's just go ahead and add you Bitcoin people to the mix. You're stupid. You're going to lose your money. Be pissed at me. You shouldn't have put money in something wacko like that. People, money, and
Okay, so that was February 2014, $549 Bitcoin when that aired. He called us stupid. In hindsight, Bitcoin's hovering above, 100,000, 500 or what, $103,000. I don't know. Maybe he's doing a disservice to his audience by not plugging Bitcoin, by not talking about Bitcoin. But it does seem like he, or rather his programming, are coming around. So this isn't Dave Ramsey himself, but this message is coming from the Dave Ramsey Show. So let's hear what they're saying now in 2025, 11 years later.
I would say Bitcoin is here. I'm not saying Bitcoin can't fall. I'm not saying I disagree with anything you said. In fact, I agree with everything. I would say to somebody, if you want to invest in Bitcoin, I would treat it just like we tell people to go sit down with a SmartVestor Pro and learn about the strategies so that you understand what you're doing. But I agree with you that it should be a part of a diversified strategy, not all eggs.
So we'll take baby steps here. We'll take baby steps. He said what? It's not going away. It should be a part of a diversified portfolio. Maybe you should go talk to the professionals here and, get a good Bitcoin strategy going on. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Well, hey, this isn't financial advice here. We're just YouTubers. But from my perspective, I think it's kind of good baby steps towards what we believe to be the best investment strategy, which is, of course, buy as much Bitcoin as possible, take it into cold storage. You don't need an expert there. You just need to understand what Bitcoin is. But at least we're getting some baby steps where they're like, okay, this Bitcoin thing isn't going away. You should probably hold a little bit. We've seen kind of from BlackRock as well. They're saying around 2 to 3%. It seems like a, reasonable place to start. They did kind of pull back from like an 80% portfolio allocation to Bitcoin, and now they're at like 3%. I think what you're seeing is this kind of like conservative narrative around Bitcoin. As I was saying in the beginning, though we are seeing some of the biggest institutions and nation states and banks in the world start to embrace Bitcoin, they do kind of have to start at a conservative baseline. They can't just be go all in. That's our job here on YouTube. That's our job at Simply Bitcoin as Bitcoin Maxis to tell you, hey, go all in on Bitcoin. This is the best thing you can be doing. But at least now they're kind of wrapping their head around what the Bitcoin thing's going on. At least they acknowledge it's not going away. way. And, it's probably a good idea to put some of it in your diversified portfolio. Though from the Bitcoin maxi perspective, I would argue like, look, don't listen to this guy here. Don't listen to Dave Ramsey. Stack as much Bitcoin as humanly possible. Obviously, pay your rent and your bills and make sure that you don't go into debt irresponsibly. But you want to be buying a lot of Bitcoin. I personally don't believe in a diversified portfolio. I think it was Warren Buffett who said it. I'm blanking on who it was, but and Saylor said it, there's no second best. You want to buy the winners. So when you see something that's winning, you double down. You do put all your eggs in one basket to build wealth. And then when you have wealth, maybe that's when you diversify. But I'm guessing everyone in the chat here and who's watching this video, they're like, how do I just acquire wealth? Look, again, disclaimer, not financial advice, but just go all in on Bitcoin. Go as all in as you can, and this is how you will win in the next decade. So here we go. We're seeing Dave Ramsey Show flip a little bit. Someone said in the chat, called Dave Ramsey Flipper. Their show is flipping. They're acknowledging Bitcoin's not going away. So we're slowly but surely winning the culture war here. It's just, one, as Valerie was saying earlier, one note at a time, one person waking up that Bitcoin isn't dying, that it's going to be here for a while, that maybe it should be a part of your portfolio. And soon enough, all the nodes will be lit up and FOMOing into Bitcoin. So, Luke, what's your thoughts on Dave Ramsey flip-flopping now? Or rather, let's be, a little more charitable here. The Dave Ramsey Show flipping on Bitcoin. I'm sure he might still be a hater on Bitcoin, but at least the programming from the Dave Ramsey Show is suddenly talking about Bitcoin as a legitimate thing to be a part of your portfolio.
Yeah, so I think everything we're talking about right now regarding diversification, I think it all ties back to the clip we played in the news section of today's show. Michael Saylor is directly telling the biggest sovereign wealth funds in the world, don't buy a 1% allocation of Bitcoin, go all in. He directly said in that video, buy as much Bitcoin as you can. Why is that? Well, it goes back to what we're talking right now. Traditional financial advisors, traditional financial gurus, the talking heads on YouTube, they're all wrong. And again, I'm wrong all the time as well. So you should never take financial advice from me. But what I will say is do your own work, do your own research. Have a look at the history of money and the history of technology, and you'll see every single time a better money comes along or a better technology comes along, these better forms of technology obsolete prior monies and prior technologies. Every single time, completely obsolete. It's not like the internet comes along and we use the internet 5% of the time or 20% of the time, and we still use, hand-delivered mail 80% of the time. No, you don't diversify. You go all in. This is also why you don't see 20 to 30 or 40% of people using horses today. Cars are the superior option for transportation. 99.99999% of the world has adopted cars, and I believe 99.9999% of the world will have adopted Bitcoin in, I think, a shorter time frame than most people think. But I don't want to trigger people. Yes, I just think this idea of diversification, Dave Ramsey, with him walking back his position, his show's position on Bitcoin, I think this is maybe, just maybe, a little bit of signal. I think this is signal that everybody is slowly coming to the realization that, hang on a minute, Bitcoin isn't just an investable asset. It's the better thing by a factor of 1,000. And this is something we talk about in the show here. Typically, it's hardest for somebody to go from a 0% allocation to Bitcoin to a 1% allocation to Bitcoin. And then once they have that 1% allocation, it's very easy to get them to 10%, 20, 50, and then eventually 100%. Like everyone will come to the realization that they need to have 100% allocation of Bitcoin. So I think the signal that somebody with as much accolades and somebody with as much, I want to be again careful and charitable, hubris as Dave Ramsey has. Again, he makes very bold statements. He's never said, yeah, I don't like Bitcoin for XYZ reasons. He's called Bitcoin investors stupid. He's openly said, buying Bitcoin, you're going to lose all your money. He's very definitive with his statements. And for the show, I know Dave hasn't said it himself yet, but for the show to kind of walk that thing back and say, yeah, hang on a minute, maybe you should talk to the experts. Maybe you want the experts. Maybe you should go talk to the experts and, have it in a part of a diversified portfolio. I think that's massive signal that even Bitcoin's biggest haters are saying, hang on a minute, maybe we were wrong. Maybe we need Bitcoin. But I think it's really interesting here.
Yeah, and actually, before I pass it over to Bob and Valerie, there was one thing when you were talking that really clicked for me. You know, he basically said, trust the experts. And as that one meme goes, you know, it's hard to get someone to get convinced of something when their job is, you know, dependent on that thing. I think that's probably where that message came from. Like, he kind of fashions himself as the expert, you know, investment expert, like get out of debt and then, you know, buy these investments. So I think that's where that's coming from, where he's like, look, you know, you don't have to trust me here, but you should trust the experts, which is kind of like a tacit, you know, approval of saying like, look, trust me, and I will make sure that your wealth is doing good in the future. So I think that's kind of where that's coming from, where he's like, yeah, you know, just trust the experts. Where we take the complete opposite route here on the show. We're like, look, we just want you to understand what Bitcoin is. And at a certain point, you won't watch the show anymore. Maybe you'll come back because we're entertaining. But once you get Bitcoin, you don't need the safety, you know, the safety wheels like on your bicycle here. It's just like buy Bitcoin, continue to buy Bitcoin, take it into self-custody, and you don't need the experts. You will turn into the expert over time. So I found that very interesting there. But anyways, I saw Valerie kind of nodding along here. Are you a fan of Dave Ramsey? Like, what's your thoughts on this? Also, not just Dave Ramsey himself, but kind of the narrative shift around everyone is waking up to they need Bitcoin.
Yeah, well, as somebody who, ran a fund and, was married to someone who ran funds for 15 years as well, you know, the ego is a really big barrier to change in the world. And so when you've got people like you just said, whose livelihood depends on the old TradFi system, it's very difficult for them to like admit like, uh-oh, I missed the thing and someone else got it before me. I remember one of my first interviews on the show was with James Lavish, and, he was an old TradFi guy on Wall Street. And he was just like, it's so difficult to talk to these guys because, their whole world is built around the old TradFi system. So when you come in as this like waver of the flag of the new guard, that is this thing called sound money, it number one, it creates the ego problem of discrediting them and all the things that they've done. And so as a fund manager, and as somebody who's, a money manager, fund manager, whatever, people like need to trust you with your advice. And so if they find something before you do, and they're like, hey, why aren't you telling me to, allocate something to Bitcoin? Or why don't you tell me to allocate everything to Bitcoin? You lose that credibility in your career. And so unfortunately, there's that cognitive dissonance of like, oh shit, I need to like save my butt, but there's this thing called Bitcoin, and how do I convert my people? And so, so I give a lot of credit to people who, show up with humility and obviously show up with numbers, data, and stories. Obviously, we're going to talk about Bob's story in a minute. But Bitcoin isn't just a number go up technology. Like I said, it's peace, freedom, and love go up technology. And so, TradFi, their whole job is obviously to get, good returns every month, every quarter, every year for their investors. And so I think it's very important to have love and compassion for the people who are waking up. And, I'm grateful that Dave's finally it is inevitable. I don't care who you are on planet Earth. Like Bitcoin is happening. It's air, it's this new form of, sovereign money for everybody to participate in. And so I really believe that, showing some love and compassion and not the have fun staying poor and all this bullshit. Like these people need help and their clients need help. And again, we're going to talk about Bob and what's going on with House of Life, but for many, many people, Bitcoin is life or death, and when we're looking at the demise of the family unit, when we're looking at people having to have 2-3 jobs, moms are out in the workforce, kids are coming home to, latchkey stuff. They're out doing drugs. They're getting, in trouble because the fiat system is so broken. And so the more that we can get TradFi and, sovereign wealth funds and the governments, et cetera, to understand why Bitcoin is a tool to create a healthy family, a healthy community, and a healthy world, we're going to win. And so I love what you guys are doing here at Simply, and I'm so grateful to be a part of the journey. And that's my little.
Really appreciate it, Valerie. Yeah, I mean, look, as the meme goes, or the saying, Bitcoin is hope. And I know personally that ever since I became obsessed with Bitcoin, I definitely have a new lease on life. And there is, that's literally where the name Optimus Fields came from. Like, there is a better future here, and it is built on Bitcoin. And you stacking Bitcoin, you storing Bitcoin, you understanding kind of the proof of work philosophy, not just as a Bitcoin mining mechanism. It's like you got to put in the work, and over time, number will go up in all aspects of your life. And so yes, everyone is catching on. Slowly but surely, they'll catch on. We know that the people that are part of the TradFi system, they'll probably be the last ones here. But hey, kudos to the Dave Ramsey Show for finally coming around 11 years later. Better late than never, I would say. Anyways, Bob, what's your thoughts on this Dave Ramsey Show coming around, or maybe the narrative shifting around Bitcoin? What's your thoughts hearing these clips?
I think it's amazing. So a year ago, we got our first Bitcoin donation, and my board of directors in Oregon and my CPA said, you should change it into dollars right away, because it's a highly speculative investment, and we shouldn't be involved in that. Fast forward to this last month. Now we're starting. My board has approved, and my CPA is in agreement that it's okay to hold Bitcoin as an asset, and we're starting a Bitcoin investment fund. So, Dave Ramsey's beyond my realm, but it's happening to my board of directors and my CPA in Lake Oswego, Oregon. So
absolutely incredible. Yeah, I think that's a perfect encapsulation of what we're seeing right now. That, hey, a couple of years ago, Bitcoin was like the most toxic thing to talk about. Not like the toxic Bitcoin maximum, but like a radioactive money asset here. And if you embraced it, it was essentially your career's over. And now we're seeing everyone is shifting. Like, even your CPA is like, you should probably hold some Bitcoin. It's probably a good idea. It's literally the Satoshi quote. You might want to get some just in case it catches on. And this is where we are right now. The narrative is catching on. People are realizing it's not going away. It's probably going to have some incredible gains. Everyone's kind of worried about the traditional financial system. They're not sure where to store their money. A lot of people are going into gold. As you can tell, it's going all-time high, though it did correct a little bit. And Bitcoin is, it did correct a little bit, but I think it's setting up a really good support level. So by the end of the year, I'm sure we're going to be looking back at the beginning of the year and make fun of Nico for being such a bear on the show. So guys, all the stars are aligning as far as I'm worried about or even caring about. It's like, this is the perfect bullish setup right now. Anyways, let's get to the news here. And we got some news coming out of the SEC.
I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Casa. Casa makes self-custody easy and secure. As a Bitcoiner, I care about holding my own private keys, but multi-sig can sometimes get tricky. Casa nails it with a multi-key security. So even if one key gets lost or stolen, your Bitcoin stays safe. And you don't give up custody, meaning no one could access your Bitcoin but you. No seed phrase anxiety, no single point of failure. I've been telling my friends and family about Casa for years. Their UX and UI on their app is by far the best in the industry. Inheritance planning is built in, and they even offer Casa for Business if you're thinking about a Bitcoin treasury. Hit up casa.io today and use promo code SIMPLY to get 10% off Casa Standard or Casa Premium. Head over to casa.io.
I want to give a shout out to our partner, CoinKite. If you take your Bitcoin security seriously, you'll need the best Bitcoin hardware wallet on the market to take self-custody. That's where Cold Card comes in. The Cold Card Q is the most advanced Bitcoin signing device ever made. It's got a full keyboard, larger screen, and NFC support, making air-gap signing easier than ever. It's built for power users who want the ultimate security without sacrificing usability. And if you're looking for a battle-tested, uncompromising cold storage, the Cold Card MK4 is your go-to with PSBT signing, an industrial-grade secure element, and USB-C. It's the perfect blend of security and convenience. Both devices
devices are, of course, 100% Bitcoin only, open source, and built by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners. Secure your Bitcoin the right way with the Cold Card Q and the MK4. Head over to coldcard.com today and use promo code SIMPLY to get 5% off anything on the store.
All right, guys. Scan the QR code and get yourself literally the best hardware wallet in the game. And if you use the promo code SIMPLY, you get 5% off. All right, guys, let's talk about this story. So I don't know if you guys saw this on Twitter, but we got this tweet coming out of Caitlin Long. And let's not forget, Caitlin Long's been in a huge saga with Custodia about full self-custody banking. And, you know, she's been on this beat for a while now and really pointing out the hypocrisy coming out of the last administration, you know, our boy Gary Gensler and the Biden administration and what's happened from the Fed. Well, we got this yesterday. And it really leans into what Nico's been saying. I know you guys are tired of hearing this, but elections have consequences. I know. Hold your tomatoes. But this is, I think, seemingly more signal and more positive light on this idea that we are seeing a more lighter touch of regulation in the U.S. So Caitlin Long tweeted, the SEC chairman's recognition that self-custody might satisfy the SEC custody's rule is fire. Clap, point down to the snippet here. So I'm going over to the sec.gov website where they have this speech or keynote, and it's a keynote address at the Crypto Task Force Roundtable on Tokenization. Ooh, tokenization word's a little ugly. So I'm not going to read the whole thing. We're just going to jump into the segment that is most relevant here, but it is broken down into three different segments. We have issuance, we have custody, and then at the end we have trading. So let's look at what they say about custody. So this is, of course, Paul Atkins. He's the new chairman of the SEC. So this isn't, someone of no importance. He's literally the head of the SEC now, and it seems like he is going very favorable for Bitcoin, which is one of the things we've been talking about for a long time. As we've repeated on the show, Saylor keeps saying there's three things that take Bitcoin to, what's it, $5 million? It is banks custodying Bitcoin, the Bitcoin ETFs, and of course, the repeal of SAB 121. And he actually mentions this in this segment. So in the segment titled Custody goes, I support providing registrants with greater optionality in determining how to custody crypto assets. Commission staff recently removed a significant impediment for companies seeking to provide crypto asset custodial services by resigning Staff Accounting Bulletin number 121. That pronouncement was a grave error. The staff had no place to act so broadly in place of commission action and without notice and comment rulemaking. The action created needless confusion and went far beyond the jurisdiction of the SEC in its effect. However, the SEC can do much more to enhance competition in the market for legally compliant custodial services than merely getting rid of SAB 121. So now, the rules are out of the way, and he's basically saying, hey, we can do more here. So kind of bullish, I would say. Going on, it is important to provide clarity on the types of custodians that qualify as a, quote, qualified custodian under the Advisors Act and Investment Company Act, as well as reasonable exceptions from the qualified custody requirements to accommodate certain common practices within crypto asset markets. Many advisors and funds have access to self-custodial solutions that incorporate more advanced technology to safeguard crypto assets as compared to some of the custodians in the market. Consequently, the custody rules may need to be updated to allow advisors and funds to engage in self-custody under certain circumstances. So basically saying, yeah, let's let these corporations self-custody, though, it's a little vague with this under certain circumstances, but hey, I'll take a small win where it's at. Additionally, it may be necessary to repeal and replace the, quote, special purpose broker-dealer framework with a more rational regime. Only 2 special purpose broker-dealers are in operation today, due clearly to the significant limitations imposed on these entities. Broker-dealers are not and never were restricted from acting as a custodian for non-security crypto assets or crypto asset securities, but commission action may be needed to clarify the application of the customer protection and net capital rules to this activity. So, I maybe Luke's more of a legalese type of guy here, but from what I'm hearing here, he's like, let's open the door here so that corporations can custody their own Bitcoin. So essentially, we don't have all the Bitcoin in these big centralized honeypots. He's like, let's leave it up to the institutions and the companies. Obviously, there's under certain circumstances here, but I think this is a good thing. And he did mention competition in self-custody, which is you know, right up all of our Bitcoiners' alley here. It's like, look, you know, just get out of our way for a little bit. You know, don't pick winners and losers here. There will eventually be winners and losers, but I think hearing the SEC kind of change their tune on not just self-custody, but Bitcoin in general, or you could say crypto assets in general, I think is a huge signal of where we're going in the future. Remember what we were hearing last year and the year before of these what was this, a non-custodial wallets, and you know what? I forget what they were saying in terms of their framing. They try to create this new idea of basically a self-hosted wallet, and or just you taking your Bitcoin into custody. I think it was self-hosted wallet, I believe. I forget what the phrase was. I black holed that. But you're seeing the SEC is coming out. They're like, hey, we messed up, or rather the old SEC head and the old SEC administration messed up. Self-custody isn't a bad thing. You know, as us Bitcoiners would say, like, self-custody is a right. It's a right for us to hold our own private property. Why is the government getting in the way of us securing our own private property? So I think this is huge news, and we'll see kind of down the line what this actually entails. This is obviously a keynote speech. He's kind of just talking about probably just projecting where the ball is going. But I think tentatively, this is a big signal of what's to come down the pipeline. So, Luke, what's your thoughts on the SEC finally pivoting on self-custody and, you know, embracing Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, the world is slowly but surely going to come to the realization that DJ Val made earlier in the show. Bitcoin is freedom. Freedom go up technology, as some call it. Okay, and I think when the world begins to embrace Bitcoin, they're saying, okay, we were wrong about Bitcoin as an investable asset. Maybe it should be a part of your diversified portfolio, like what Dave Ramsey's saying. Or when the biggest banks who have hated Bitcoin for years finally get the green light to custody Bitcoin because they're scrambling to custody Bitcoin. This is all like just little tiny dominoes falling day by day that I think, again, ties back to the news that we mentioned at the beginning of the show. What would the world look like if we're on a Bitcoin standard and not a petrodollar standard? This is, again, something we haven't mentioned about the potential of these massive Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds getting into Bitcoin. It's no coincidence that when we've been living on this petrodollar standard for the past 50 years, where the Middle Eastern giants have said, we only accept US dollars for our precious oil, no other currencies. Because, again, we're engaging in helping the US and central banks around the world create the century of war. That's what central banking has done. Now that I think we're beginning to see not only Dave Ramsey, but also the banks flip-flop on their Bitcoin position. And now we have Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds, not just buying hundreds of millions of dollars of BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF like they did in the beginning of the year, but now they're being urged by Michael Saylor to buy as much Bitcoin as they can. I think these are all little dominoes falling that we need to be paying very close attention to, because maybe, just maybe, the Bitcoin standard could be a lot closer than a lot of us think it is. Because a lot of people think this petrodollar standard, this US dollar central banking standard that has created so many atrocities around the world and so much war, so much bloodshed, maybe it's closer to finishing than we might think. Which is why, again, we bring you the news every single day, because the news, it's showing us something. These dominoes falling every single day is just maybe more confirmation that the biggest guys, the banks, the billionaires, the sovereign wealth funds, they're all quietly adopting Bitcoin in the background. And this is why we urge you guys, seriously, you need to investigate Bitcoin today. I even met someone who spent 10 hours actually looking into Bitcoin, who said, yeah, you know what? It's boring. It's not for me. I'm not really interested in this Bitcoin thing. This is what these banks are being forced to do. They're being forced to at least investigate Bitcoin for 10 hours. It's now become, it's not an asset you cannot, look into these days. You can't ignore it. Those are the words I'm looking for. Bitcoin is an asset you can no longer ignore. And the fact that we're seeing all these billionaires every day, flip-flop here and a flip-flop there. We're seeing flip-flops literally everywhere. And that's because are being forced to investigate Bitcoin for at least 5 hours or 10 hours. And yes, earlier in the week, I'm not sure if we've talked about this or not, but Dell, multi-$100 billion company, came out and rejected a proposal to put Bitcoin on the balance sheet. Maybe they didn't do their 10 hours of due diligence for Bitcoin. Maybe they just looked at it for an hour. But I think eventually all these guys are going to be absolutely forced to investigate Bitcoin for at least 10 hours. And when you do that, you're going to see more news headlines hit the tape, like we're bringing you right now, with the SEC greenlighting all the biggest banks in the world to adopt Bitcoin. And what did Michael Saylor say, Opti? Didn't Michael Saylor say we need 3 things for $5 million Bitcoin? 1, we need spot Bitcoin ETFs. 2, we need the FASB fair value accounting rules to change. Public companies need fair value accounting methods if they're to put Bitcoin on the balance sheet. And the third pillar, the third catalyst, Michael Saylor believes we need for $5 million Bitcoin, banks to custody Bitcoin. So again, I'm sure many of you guys watching the stream keeping count at home, and you might recognize we have all 3 catalysts today ready for what a multi-billionaire believes is needed for $5 million Bitcoin. What do you think, Opti?
Yeah, I'm starting to feel very bullish. It's like kind of how you said, or what's that saying about compounding interest is like the 9th phenomenon in the world or whatever like that. I'm starting to feel that with the news story. Like all these little news stories are starting to add up, and it really feels like the water is boiling right here, and Bitcoin is about to explode. When we don't know, but I think it's sooner than later. Anyways, I will pass it over to Valerie. Valerie, what's your thoughts on the SEC flipping on self-custody? Are you a fan of the banks getting into Bitcoin, or did you think this was just an inevitable, trend that we are going to see?
Like I said earlier, I think Bitcoin is inevitable. I think, banks are going to have to start paying attention. Governments are going to have to start paying attention. Pensions, nonprofits, businesses, homes, moms, everybody. I mean, it is something that, again, I believe is like this tsunami that's going to be happening. The other thing that I think is really interesting, that we need to focus on, and obviously we'll be talking to Bob in a second, but like, when you look at all the stranded energy that is out there in the world, right? Whether it's hydro, whether it's methane, et cetera, we've got opportunities to, create grids for people who don't have access to power, what Eric Hersman's doing with Gridless in Africa. So when these, entities start realizing like, oh, what do you mean? I can like get electricity into these villages that are never going to get connected to the real grid, because it's just way too far out there. But we're going to start having quality of life go up, love go up, and health go up for people because Bitcoin can create, because you can't just go out and put like an energy grid into, these really rural, remote areas where people are suffering and they're struggling and they're living by candlelight, And so if you look at like Alana Mediavia's film, Dirty Coin, I think it's super important for everybody to start realizing it's not just a philanthropic endeavor to go out there and create, mining facilities and capture, methane or, create, micro grids where there's water flowing. And so, and obviously solar, et cetera. So when people start to really understand that we're going to be able to up-level the quality of human life on this earth because of the other things that Bitcoin offers, of course the SEC is going to come along. Of course the banks are going to come along. Of course, the governments are going to come along. So, the more that we can get out there, I've gone to tons of, my ex-boyfriend was in, he's a company, a nonprofit called Nature Tech Collective. They use technology to learn about like how nature can, support human life and, data points and stuff. I went to so many climate conferences and I'm like, oh God, these people don't know what's going on. The minute I would say Bitcoin, they would all pucker up and like, Bitcoin's boiling the oceans. It's using too much energy. I'm like, good. I hope it uses 1,000 times more energy. And I hope we can create 1,000 times more energy because that way people are not doing surgery by candlelight. That way you can refrigerate your medicines. That way you can refrigerate your foods, etc. And so I think it's super important that we keep having all the holistic variables of the conversation in here. And so, obviously these big entities coming in, like I said, I think it's inevitable.
Love it. Appreciate it. Okay. Hey, well, Bob's not here. So perfect. I really wanted to jump into the culture. So we're going to transition straight into the culture and we'll chat about Mi Casa Kids International. So let's get into that and we'll wrap up today's show.
I want to give a shout out to our partner, HIVE Digital Technology. Why HIVE in 2025? Unstoppable growth. As the first ever
public miner, HIVE's position to quadruple their global footprint, making them one of the world's fastest growing miners in 2025. And with elite operations that consistently top the industry in Bitcoin mined per exahash, HIVE's now headquartered in the USA. They're lean and mean, they're green and clean, and they're rewriting the playbook on sustainable Bitcoin mining. You can catch the latest buzz at Hive Digital Tech or at hivedigitaltech.com. Need liquidity without having to sell your Bitcoin? For more than 6 years now, Ledn has been the trusted choice for Bitcoin-backed lending with transparency, security, and trust at their core. I absolutely love these guys, and I personally not only have an account with them, but also a loan. And some of the key features that I love about Ledn is the fact that there are no monthly payments. You pay at the end of the term. You also have the ability to roll over the loan as well, and you can pay it back whenever you want. Essentially what they do is that they help their clients unlock the liquidity of their BTC, allowing you to hodl while still accessing the wealth of your Bitcoin. They've been battle tested with their focus on transparency, security, and trust, allowing them to build a proven track record of client success and security, helping tens of thousands of clients harness the value of their digital assets with confidence and peace of mind. Learn more about what your BTC can do for you today. Simply Bitcoin viewers get 0.25% off their first loan by using the link in the video/podcast description. What are you waiting for? Head over to ledn.io today.
Okay, here we are. All right, well, it looks like Bob is having some issues over there. So, Valerie, I will give you the floor first and foremost. There we go. There's Bob. Let's start with, I'm over here for you guys on the audio listeners, micasakids.org. Valerie was telling me before the show, you just got back from El Salvador. You're really excited about this new project that you are a part of. So let's just start with, what is the House of Life organization? What did you see in El Salvador? And as you mentioned, to wrap up the show, the 4 solutions that Bitcoin can offer to help the world. So the floor is yours, Valerie.
Thanks so much, Opti. Thanks, Luke. And I know Bob right now, he's waiting for a couple volunteers to show up. So that's why he's kind of in and out. So he's helping people get into the gate. So if he pops in and out, just bear with him and whatnot. But so about a month and a half ago, I was driving down a mountain to get some groceries. I asked God, Spirit, Universe, I said, am I doing enough with my time, treasure, and talent that you've gifted me with? And loud and clear, God was like, you need to work on human trafficking. And I have some sexual abuse and violence in my past as a child, and many times actually with different people. And I was like, God, are you sure that I'm supposed to be doing this work? Because I'm going to cry a lot, are you sure? And God's like, you've been training for this your whole life, honey. And I was like, all right. And then within 12 hours, my friend Claudia reached out to me and she's like, hey, I just got back from the House of Life. I'm doing, this work with girls who are pregnant and have been subjected to human trafficking and violence. And I was like, oh, well, that's an interesting domino right there. Thanks. And that night I hosted a women's space on Twitter, and I started asking some of the Bitcoin women. I was like, what do you guys think about this? And they're like, heck yeah, let's do it. We can come down and we can start training the girls about, marketing and sales, and we can train the girls about Bitcoin. We can train the girls about regenerative agriculture, etc. So for me personally, all these things just kept lining up. And, and I got to speak with Bob, who is a saint, we'll pull him up here in just a second. But the work that, we know Ryan Mata is doing all these great videos and documentaries about human trafficking and pedophilia and the things that are happening around the world, which I consider a global emergency. One child in this situation is one too many, but millions of children are millions too many. And as Bitcoiners, I feel like we've got an opportunity to use our time, treasure, and talent to address the 4 areas, like, and I mentioned earlier, number 1 is rescue. Number 2 is rehabilitate. Number 3 is get them training for life skills. And number 4 is getting them a safe place to live so that they can have a safe, happy, healthy life with their children. So, I got to go down there. They've got a dorm where volunteer vacations can happen at the Mikasa Kids. And so I got to stay on site for 3 days with Bob and the girls. We did some vision board workshops. We did a big fundraiser. We had a couple DJs. Obviously, I threw some tunes down, which was really fun. Yay. But we had people, somebody showed up and donated a house. So stage 4 is where the girls need a safe place to live. And so we had John, who's like, I'll build you guys a house. You just got to give me some land. So we've got all of these wonderful Bitcoiners showing up and saying like, I can do this, I can do that. I can do jobs training. I can do building. I've got land. I've got property. I've got community development, etc. I'm a social worker. I can help. I've got media coverage. And so it's just like activated the hearts of so many Bitcoiners right now. And so, I'm going to cry. Sorry. I cry a lot because it's such a beautiful project. And, but it's so powerful, and some people are like, oh man, I can't even watch the video. And I'm like, let me tell you what, the girls that are in the video are stronger than we are. And so you can watch a video about what's going on with their life if these girls have to live it. And these girls are coming out of places that, we can't even imagine what they've been through, And so Bob McDonell, who we're going to pull up here in a second, is the founder. He's been working with, orphans for the last 30 some years. And then he started the House of Life, about 18 months ago. And, I'd love for him to share his story and, what the transformation has been going on. We're going to be at the Bitcoin conference. Like I said, we're going to be talking Thursday at 10:30 with Bob, Ryan Mata, and Miss Salvador. And, we're just looking to do fundraising. And so my job in the background is to help them get their tech stack together. We've got people who are helping, with training and whatnot. And so I'm just kind of trying to be kind of an executive dork and help out. So God bless Bob. God bless the team. And thank you for having us again.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, Bob,
Luke.
chime in here.
So Bob.
Thank you guys so much. The department, the Attorney General's office just popped in here a little while ago, and they're like, what you are doing with the word is traveling all over the place. And they're like, we have all these kids in government orphanages, kids that have been, are victims of the gang violence that was going on for years here in El Salvador. And as soon as they turn 18 and they leave, they just go out and they're totally re-victimized. And they're very interested in what we're doing with our phase 3, which is empowering these kids to be able to make a living for themselves and also to get them into a place to live, because without help, they'll never have a place to live. And the same with our girls here at the House of Life. If they leave here with their baby, they have no place to go. And the only jobs they can get would be jobs where all the money, all the funds they have would be to rent a room someplace and eat on a daily basis. That's it. They're stuck. And their only option is to hook up with some guy that's going to promise them the moon, and then they'll end up pregnant again. The cycle continues. And what happened to their mothers, their grandmothers, and their great-grandmothers happens again to them and their 5, 6, 7, or 10 children. So the very fact that El Salvador, and really, it would have been very difficult to find a solution to this had it not been for Bitcoin coming to El Salvador and all these amazing people helping us. It's a miracle what's going on. So I'm just blessed to be a part of it. Now we have Will from Club Cocal coming, and Paul. These guys are walking in my office here, some Bitcoiners. They're going to help me on my cold wallet.
I'm going to say hi.
Yeah, wait, Valerie wants to say hi. Guys, Valerie's on this show. Hey, Valerie.
Hey guys.
What's up, Val?
Aloha. Woohoo.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Live.
Yeah,
Sally
brother.
Luke,
What is up?
Yo, how are you guys?
How you doing, man?
I'm less good than you guys because I'm jealous that I'm not with you in my favorite country. I hope you're doing well.
When are you coming back to the jungle,
I'm coming back maybe next week.
Nice.
No way, dude.
Awesome.
Amazing.
Let's Valerie or Bob, as Bob said, none of this would have been possible if it wasn't for Bitcoin. Can we, touch on how Bitcoin actually, or even just Bitcoiners facilitated this? Because I think that might be the most interesting thing for us, our audience here, besides the incredible work you're doing. This is a Bitcoin show, and they're like, how do these two things connect? How did Bitcoin facilitate this?
Well, Bitcoin facilitated this. Number one, I got to meet Claudia at the Adopting Bitcoin conference, 3.5 years ago, where I was, speaking and emceeing. So just the fact that Satoshi created Bitcoin and we got Bitcoin conferences and we're bringing people together, like I said, Bitcoin's a network of love. And so because of Satoshi and Bitcoin, I got connected with her. Then I got connected with, the House of Life. But boots on the ground, tangible things like, what's Bitcoin doing to support these girls? So a couple things, like I said, Miss Bitcoin, Alejandra, she raised over $15,000 in the last 2 weeks just with a couple posts, and people were donating Bitcoin. They're excited. They want to support what Bob's doing. And as we know, like right now, I'm looking at back end software stuff like Classy, GoFundMe, Give Butter, etc. They're taking 6% of every transaction. And so what we're doing is helping Bob save that 6%. And when you're running like a lean budget that doesn't get funded by the government and everything comes out of people's pocket, that 6% is huge, right? And plus, on top of that, you've got your 2.9% of your credit card. So you're almost at, 9% of transaction fees. So when people are donating to Bob in Bitcoin, they're getting a 9% up level of, how much money they're receiving. And number two, we've obviously got Me Premier Bitcoin coming in and educating the children so that they can understand what, Bitcoin is and what is sound money, what is financial literacy, what is cold storage, et cetera. And so we want these girls to be financially literate when they graduate. We want the nonprofits of the world, all of them, not just the House of Life, but like, how do you create a Bitcoin treasury as a nonprofit? Because they've got big dreams for expansion and duplication and scaling. And so if you're saving in fiat, dirty fiat, that's, losing its purchasing power, you're not going to be able to achieve those scalable goals, right? And so what we're trying to do right now is, look at what our urgent, short, medium, and long-term goals are for, Bob and whatnot, and obviously his operating expenses, but like, how are we saving for the future? Because they've got a $171,000 project that we're looking to put a second story on top of the House of Life. That's going to save another 18 lives, 18 people. So $10,000 a life, that seems pretty good if we can save lives that way. But if we're saving in fiat, that's going to take a long time to get. But if we're doing this with Bitcoin or perhaps Bitcoin donations, we're going to be able to achieve those goals a lot faster, so I think that's super important. The other thing that we're looking at, obviously, is, I've done a lot of summits and I do lightning splits. And so if somebody's like, donating to all the podcasters or the people on my summits, automatically everything goes, 10% to your wallet, your wallet, your wallet. What we want to do is start teaching the girls, obviously life development skills and how to use Bitcoin in their businesses and accept Bitcoin cross borders. But then you can pay your people in Bitcoin. And then you can have like, okay, 1% is going to go to the House of Life, 10% is going to each of the girls, et cetera. And so you can't do that with PayPal. You can't do that with Venmo. You can't do that with your regular, fiat operating system. And the girls they can't have bank accounts right now. So Bitcoin gives them an opportunity to save in Bitcoin. So when they're 18 and older, they're going to have a nest egg, and they can watch it, they can identify it, they start to learn, so I think it's really neat. We've got Lightning Piggy, which is a great project for kids. And, teaching people about financial literacy, and they've got the LED screen of how many sats do you have. So, Julie and I are working on a separate project for financial literacy for kids, and wallet for kids. So when you have the opportunity to start looking at, do I want to donate, invest, save, spend, or use something on education, these 5 buckets, the kids start developing a different time preference. And as Bitcoiners, we know low time preference is preferable to high time preference. So instead of the kids spending money on ice cream, they're going to say, wow, I want to save for this class that I want to do, or I'm saving for a bicycle or whatever. So, opening the dialogue of financial literacy, using Bitcoin as a tool and using the mechanism of splits is so, so important. And so, what Bob's, got these wonderful children that he's loving, like it's a great chocolate and peanut butter mix, right? Remember that old commercial? So, we're doing the work of God right now, spirit, universe, whatever you prefer to call this magical, creative being that brought us all together. And, again, Bob is rescuing children every day, and he works 7 days a week. He gets up every single day and thinks about what's going on with these children. So it's not a 9 to 5. But like I said earlier, Opti and Luke, we're putting together an open source playbook for people who want to create houses of lives in their communities, and how do you integrate Bitcoin into that profile. And so again, we're putting back end stuff. So you've got almost like a baby registry, like you can donate, 100 diapers a month for, the House of Life, or you can, we want people to be able to have transparency completely of where their money is going. And so we're going to start training the girls, like, how do you do marketing? How do you do social media? How do you do a newsletter? How do you communicate to your audience? Like, hey, little Maria started walking today. Like, here's some pictures of her taking her first steps, of course, protecting her privacy, etc. But it's very, very important that these girls learn communication skills and confidence, because their confidence has been completely shattered. And so what Bob is doing, and what all the donors and the volunteers like Paul and Will, and Luis and everybody from Club Cocal, we've got, like I said, Satoshi's Bar next door. We had thousands of dollars of donations just in kind, with donating this. So we want to aim, we're aiming to duplicate this, and then obviously get them their treasury. So I'm just so excited to be a part of this. It's completely transformed my life and the trajectory of where I'm going to be spending a ton of time. So if you guys want to donate, go to micasakids.org. You can donate in fiat. You can donate in Bitcoin, of course. If you want to learn about coming down and doing a volunteer vacation, reach out to Bob. His email's there. And we're going to be setting a lot of stuff up so that when we're having opportunities for looking down, like I said, for adopting or Plan B or Max and Stacy or whatever you want, like, bring a group of people down and think about, how can I contribute to the House of Life? Can you paint? Can you do something with the girls? Can you dig a ditch so that the girls can have an organic garden? There's so many things that people can do. So it takes a village, and we are a beautiful, bright orange village.
Love it,
So,
Valerie. All
thanks,
right.
guys.
Hey, Bob, to wrap up the show, you want to give some final thoughts before we close out today's show? I see you got the whole team down there, but Bob, final message to the audience, what would that be?
It would be that, we have these kids here, and if we don't help them launch properly, they just go right back and they're re-victimized again. So really, I'm so blessed by all these people, by all these Bitcoiners that have come to El Salvador. This country was like in dire need. And I don't know if it's because it's named the Savior, El Salvador, but God loves this country because he sent all you guys down here. So let's do this. Let's duplicate it. Let's have people copy us. Let's do everything we can. There's a lot of kids that need help down here. And thank you so much for having us
Really
on.
appreciate you guys coming on. Again, for the audio listeners, you guys could go to micasakids.org if you are interested in this project. All right, let me pull you guys off the screen as I wrap up today's show. Thank you so much for coming on, Valerie and Bob. And of course, Luke, thanks for filling in. We experiment a little bit. Appreciate that. Actually, before we move on, let's wrap up today's show the right way. I know Luke's not going to make it because of his visa and all that stuff, but make sure you guys go to the Bitcoin Conference 2025 in Las Vegas. It is in about 15 days. Well, less than 15 days. I guess like 13 days or whatever. As you can see, I think this one might be bigger than ever. Obviously, the Bitcoin price is pumping, but let's not forget, last year they had Trump, who was a president-elect. He was a presidential candidate. This year they have a sitting vice president speaking. So, I'm interested to see what Vance is going to say. And of course, we have Ross is going to be there, first time publicly speaking. I think there's going to be some big news coming out of Las Vegas at Bitcoin 2025. So make sure you scan the QR code and use the promo code SIMPLY to get 10% off. All right, guys, on that note, we are out of here. Really appreciate you guys. Luke, thanks for filling in. Stick around, guys, as I wrap up. All right, guys, this was episode, I think, 1244. It's been your host, Optimus Fields. We will be back tomorrow for our normal programming. Really appreciate you guys. Go outside, touch some grass, eat some good food, call your loved ones. Of course, stack some sats, because you might not be able to get Bitcoin at this price ever again. On that note, peace out. We'll see you tomorrow.
Today's episode was brought to you by BitcoinWell.com, a Bitcoin-only platform on a mission to enable financial independence.